Good evening, Justin.
Good evening, Amanda.
How are you? It's been ages since we've been here for book club, but I have seen you in between in person here in
That's
Perth,
right. That's right.
which
We
was
know we
awesome.
know both of us are who we are and can vouch for each other if we ever had to.
Yeah, we know
Being real
what we
person.
look like below the waist.
Yeah,
When you get to know people. The
yeah.
biggest thing about Zoom is how you don't know people's height. You were taller than I expected because
Oh,
you
really?
can't tell on Zoom. Yeah, so yeah, you just don't know.
Yeah. So,
Anyway, it's good to see you on Zoom again, and we are here to chat about this tome, Travel as a Political Act. It's very shiny, isn't it? By
yeah.
Rick Steves. So as you can see, we've both got lots of thoughts, lots of post-its and tags in there. So
Yeah.
we've been doing our homework well, haven't we? So well, let's start off as we often do with our kind of overview. So, Justin, your overall thoughts of Travel as a Political Act by Rick Steves.
It definitely is a book that wasn't. It's not the same style of book that we've read before. So, and I enjoyed it from the fact that I like to know about politics, and in that way around countries like, I often follow the politics of countries that I've been to and traveled to. So I did get a bit out of that. I think there would be a lot of people who would start reading this book and just go, no, and go back to some of the more storytelling type books. This one's quite a deep book in terms of the facts it's got, and there is obviously his opinion and his way of putting things and stuff like that. But and it's a good book in that regards, but yeah, it's a hard thing. It's a hard book to read as well. It's no different to trying to read a textbook or something like that in some ways, or or a history of the world or something like that. Or that it's quite heavy in parts. There's obviously opinions which you may or may not agree with throughout the book as well. But yeah, look, I'm glad I read it. It gives
That's good. And you got to the end.
Yeah, and I got to the end, and I kind of found myself agreeing with a lot of the stuff, but not all of it. And yeah, and
we'll discuss further.
Given the book has the word political in it, I think that was probably always going to be the case. So
yes, true. Yes, absolutely. Okay, I agree. Basically, it was. I mean, it's in some ways it's kind of a how to be a thoughtful traveler in a sense.
Yeah.
So I like that. There's a lot of parts to it that I really like and agree with, which we'll get to. There's a few parts that I had some issues with. And definitely, like, I think I'm not the audience. I think the audience is very much a certain kind of American traveler. Yeah. And so I found some of the bits are a bit America-centric, I suppose, which is fine because I'm not the audience. But
it's probably going to be travelers who typically would do maybe cruise ships or larger tours, perhaps, that do travel, but maybe haven't gone outside their comfort zone. Because I don't think it would appeal to non-people who don't travel. Like some might read it, but you really would need to want to know about what's traveling like to these places. And if you're not really a traveler, you probably wouldn't. It's not something you're going to really get into. But
no, it would be probably hard to relate to, I guess. Yeah. But if you're kind of a experienced independent traveler, then it kind of says stuff you know already, and might say things that you might kind of disagree with or sometimes roll your eyes at.
Yeah, exactly. So really it's that kind of, and it's clearly written for his audience, which is Americans, because he is an American. So everything's compared to America in the book. Mostly you're a bit of Middle East, South America, Central America, that kind of thing. So he's comparing it with what he knows and what his target audience knows. And there's some insightful things in there. There's some stuff in there that it's like, maybe not. Don't really 100% agree with that, but
but there's still some good parts, which we'll get to the good and the bad, I suppose. So I went away to look at some people who'd reviewed it because I wondered, what other people thought after I was kind of like had quite mixed feelings. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from a review that I think sums up quite nicely how I think too. So it was a review from blog or a website called lotsinTranslation.com. It should be noted that, like almost everything Steves writes, this book is primarily for Americans. Many of his lessons will be obvious to people who live elsewhere. Agreed. And Steves is prone to falling into stereotypes when he compares Europeans and Americans, and not being an expert on anything he writes about, his analysis can be fairly superficial. And of course, there is the trademark cheesy Rick Steves style. I didn't know it's trademark style, but it makes sense. That is inevitable. But I think this book is valuable for voicing some opinions that are likely to be quite unpopular among many Americans, and for doing so in a way that is accessible and friendly.
Yeah.
I think that sums it up pretty well, actually.
Yeah.
Right, we can go home now. No.
and that's the thing. He knows the target audience he's writing the book to. So, and I think he's probably written it to the audience quite well.
Yes.
So,
yeah,
it doesn't mean there's nothing in there for other people, but
yeah,
you kind of read it. No, the whole time you're reading that, thinking, oh, why is this? This is obvious. This is obvious, but it's not for the people reading the book necessarily.
No. And like 20 years ago, it wouldn't have been obvious to me either. Perhaps if I'd read this before I traveled much, then, when I just traveled a little, then it would have been really enlightening and useful. I've
certainly, some of the places he talks about going to, my opinions have changed over the years on all of those places as well, because I had a different opinion of a lot of places, and a lot of it was very much what I thought was right. And now it's like much more cloudier,
Yes.
Neither side's probably right, kind of thing, if you know what I mean. So
yeah, absolutely.
I take on all of these things. Neither side's 100% right. So
Yeah, that's so true with lots of things. I think when we're like in our early 20s, this is big generalization, but you think you know everything about everything, and you're sure about everything. And the older you get, the more gray areas everything gets. So yeah, I think that's probably a good analogy. So actually, one of my favorite things, I must say, that endeared him to me is early in the book, he explained that when he started running his tours to Europe, he actually ran them he'd have a group of travelers, but he didn't even make hotel reservations. They would just show up, and, part of the trip was, finding somewhere to stay, which I thought was actually very endearing, because, I love traveling that way, especially, 20 years ago, very pre-smartphone. I always traveled that way. But he said people didn't like it very much, so he had to start making reservations. But the fact that he started out that way kind of shows some good intent to me.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of baby step. You're in a tour, but not everything's already organized before you get onto the tour, and you can get by with if it's not. And I get that you probably get it all the time as well. Like people sort of, I was talking about booking some flights, and I had to book a couple of separate flights, and they're not going to be connected, and like that. People go, "Oh, what happens if this happens?" I'm going, "Well, I've made sure I get from the main point to the next main point, and if the local connections get stuffed up at the end or something like that, I'll make sure I got money to book a hotel or pay for another flight." So you can plan these things around. Now, not everyone would be able to do that, but knowing, there are people like, they have a list that they'll have accommodation if they're not planning. I know people who do a little bit of research for the cities they might travel through, just in case they get stuck there. Where's the hotel or whatever, or sometimes, I've been stuck in places and you just ask someone, and next they'll find you somewhere to stay. And that said, I'm very much a plan ahead and book kind of person these days.
Look, I think also
I'd like to be the other way, but I don't know. I value my time and where I'm staying, and
Yeah, and I think the world has changed a bit. I think it's harder to travel more spontaneously. I mean, maybe in certain areas and certain circumstances, like if you're backpacking, you're in Southeast Asia, you can probably just really just wing it and turn up and there's a room at the hostel. But like in so many other situations these days, it is much harder to just really wing it. And because everyone else is booked because they've got, they've used their smartphone, even if it's only a couple of days before, but they are kind of booking
Yeah.
ahead. So
I think that's the other thing is when everyone's just booking as they go, then there's lots of availability. But now that availability is not there because people are able to book from halfway around the world, and you're kind of then left with the places, the scraps, and sometimes you might find a gem in those scraps, and other times you won't. But
no, I feel a bit the same. I tend to book most things. It's not very far in advance, but yeah, unless it's for some special reason. But
even then, things can go wrong. I've had things go wrong, so always
things go wrong all the time. I've got another episode coming out soon about things going wrong for people because my listeners love hearing about when things go wrong. So that's the consolation. I just wanted to run through what I liked about in the first chapter, that he had a kind of a general how to travel, which really kind of is very, along the lines of my thoughtful travel and stuff as well. So it was like travel with intention, connect with people, be open-minded, take history seriously, overcome fear, go beyond your comfort zone. And then a couple of things that I would probably rephrase, but he talks about understanding, this is true. Understand that the American dream isn't the only dream.
Yeah.
And seeing the rich/poor gap for yourself. I think that there's a better way to describe it, but I see what he means. So recognize your own privilege and see what other places are like.
Yeah.
So,
and I think like the American dream one was what, it was sold as, I guess, probably as a way to get some of the immigrant workers in, and these people want to share your dream, everything like that, and live in the best country in the world, blah blah blah. And but it doesn't necessarily apply to other countries that are already, on the same footing as where America sits in terms of its economy and and
then also all of those happiness studies where countries of all kinds of economic development levels, the people are often happier, etc. So
Bhutan's often listed as one of those places, and it's not a wealthy country, but it people seem to be there. And then even in you ask people in some of these Asian countries where you often do find people will go work overseas to bring money back home, but a lot of them still want to go, when they finish working, want to retire back in their home because that's what they like to live. It's just that there wasn't an opportunity there in their home country. So there's a lot of reasons why, and a lot of people have a different idea of what they want in life. Some people, it's just having that roof and food, and a roof overhead and food and a stay, no bombs being dropped and everything like that. And to them, that is, and a job, and they just go
family nearby and connections and friends and
in those societies, they don't have that. Like if one of their kids says, "Oh, I'm going to go traveling," their parents would probably be against it because they go, "Why do you want to go traveling? What's wrong with just staying here?" And so, that whole recognition that your way isn't the best way for everyone, and I think is something we all pick up when we travel anyway. But we all want everyone to sort of not be, oppressed, and not be, the human rights and all that kind of stuff. But we also want them to be able to live the life they want to live, not live the life we tell them they should live. So.
Yes, exactly. Well said. You picked out a good quote.
That was early in the book too, and I thought, geez, this is almost like Amanda wrote it for her podcast. So, and it's in the preface, I think, of the book based on the page number here. But the quote was, "Thoughtful travelers do it, as in travel, to have enlightening experiences, to meet inspirational people, to be stimulated, to learn and to grow." And I'm like, well, that's pretty much why I travel. So.
And he uses the phrase "thoughtful travelers," so we've got to like him for that.
So I thought, geez, that's definitely. It's almost like I had a look on your website, I couldn't find it, so he didn't steal it from you. So
no, and I didn't steal his either. But it's he's got the right idea, so this has got to be a good thing. So now I think I'm going to skip straight to the meeting people section. So I thought he talks about meeting people throughout the book, but he sort of has a section on it. But then throughout the book, it's littered with stories of people he's met from his travels. And I do think he genuinely does seem to do this very well. Although I found it funny, he admits somewhere in the book that he doesn't speak any other languages and always, pays a translator. And I kind of thought it wouldn't be bad if you tried to learn something. But but maybe he has and he just didn't say it. I don't know. But one thing he said in that chapter was, with the right approach, meeting people, whether over beer in an Irish pub, while hiking Himalayan ridges, or sharing fashion tips in Iran, meeting people can connect you more thoughtfully with our world.
Yeah.
He's spot on. Yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah. But the other part he says to that, which I found interesting, this was actually in the El Salvador chapter 8, he said, a good traveler needs to be the extrovert. And I would take issue with that. What do you think?
I think there's definitely cultures where, you definitely would need to be more of the extrovert. I'm not extroverted. I'm very introverted. Whether people believe that or not, I don't know. But I certainly, though, am more extroverted when I travel. So I'm much more likely to go talk to someone when I'm traveling than I would just in my day-to-day life. Unless there was a reason to talk to them, like, someone's serving me coffee and they ask me how my day is and have a bit of a chit chat or something like that in my day-to-day life, I wouldn't normally go out of my way. Whereas I'm much more likely to ask someone something in the streets of a foreign country or something like that if I need to.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not. And but there are countries where, certainly, I'm thinking of some of the Southeast Asian ones, like where the locals are very extroverted and very, forward. Like, this long time ago now, since I was in Vietnam, and I was asked numerous times if I was interested to marry one of their daughters or not marry. And so that sort of thing, like, I'd never say that to someone in Australia,
No, that's true. To a stranger, particularly.
Yeah, to a stranger. But, in Vietnam, it was like they'd ask you all about your life. And my friend who I was traveling with was engaged, and they're like, "Oh, well, what about you then?" I've got, and so the conversation, and they weren't awkward conversations or anything like that, but you would just never. That's kind of one of the few times where I can think of where, unless people are trying to sell something, that you kind of got an insight into their life, and you didn't have to lead that conversation. Whereas a lot of the time, I think if you want to know a bit about that person, that's when you got to kind of lead the conversation.
Yeah. I'm curious. I want to just ask one more question. So I'm fairly extroverted, especially when I travel. I mean, I just like to talk, and so that I find that okay. But as a more introverted person, Justin, do you find that you have a bit of a different personality when you travel, and you find it easier because, like, you don't know anyone, and it's like no one expects you to behave in a certain way? Or
and I think I might have mentioned this in one of your podcasts ages ago. I can't remember, but I think they're in like the hundreds or even before the hundreds started.
Years ago.
And I think we discussed that then.
Maybe, yeah.
And how when you're not surrounded by familiarity, you just don't seem to have that. Whatever holds you back in your normal day-to-day life isn't there anymore. So it's, I kind of feel a bit more like, no, I don't really care if people think I'm silly or whatever, like
exactly.
The internal voices that might stop you from doing something at home aren't really there when you travel. So because they're a completely different environment, and often you're just adjusting to it. And sure, there are people I've seen people go right into their shell when they travel as well, but often it's because it's a safety thing for them, and but I think less, and it's more of a necessity and a need as well, especially if you're traveling by yourself. Like,
you have to talk to people to find out lots of things.
People. If you're away for a couple of months by yourself, as much as I can get by a day without talking to people and stuff like that at home, and that the loneliness will then set in, because you always know at home you can call someone if you did need to talk to them or whatever. So
sure,
so I think that's probably how it works. And I think in the terms of the book, and where he was talking about the people he the people he like the tours and stuff he took. I think there's a lot of those people would be more the sort of ones that would be from a security point of view or would are unsure what to expect. They might go back into their shells, whereas so he probably sees it a lot more on the kind of tours he leads that
Yeah.
based on because he'd take people to places where they've been told one thing, and so they'll be very and I had a little bit of that in South America with some of the people I traveled with there. Like some of them weren't really sure what to expect in South America, but then they go to South America and they've experienced it now, and it's like we've got to come back here as soon as we can. So because we don't get a lot of news in Australia about South America, and the stuff we do get is mostly about Colombian drug lords or
it tends to be the bad news side, doesn't it?
or something going wrong because I think they had to shut Machu Picchu and stuff like that. So we don't get the good stuff or the day-to-day life stuff, especially from places that are much further away. So, and I think that's probably applicable to everywhere in the world. You get to know your neighbors, but beyond that, far less so.
Yeah. I do feel like, especially South America, there's such a gap that we just, it's almost as though it doesn't exist here.
Yeah.
And most parts of Africa as well.
Africa as well.
Yeah. So, we kind of get Asian news because that's our neighbor, and Europe and America, perhaps, I don't know, to some extent, but it's interesting, isn't it? Okay, speaking of Europe, actually, let's move on to one of my favorite topics, which is Denmark, the country. So in Rick Steves' book, there is an entire chapter devoted to Denmark. So obviously, most of his tours run in Europe, like that's his area of specialty, going to Europe, and so obviously been there many times.
Into Denmark, because I kind of thought a lot of what he said might have applied to other parts of Scandinavia, but I haven't been to necessarily all of them and stuff like that. But
I haven't been to the others recently either. No. I kind of know a bit. Yeah. So, I mean, my experience of Denmark did concur with his as well. So just give me 2 seconds. Hey, Ruben, we can all hear you. I've been messaging him to say, be quiet. But okay. So Denmark, I'll give you a couple of things that I liked about it. So obviously, he describes it as being much more socialistic, which it is, obviously. And he contrasts that with the very individualistic nature of the US, which fits. And I liked what he said. He was chatting, actually, this was a Swiss friend, but same kind of thing. So he makes a lot about how much higher taxes in Scandinavia, Switzerland, etc. And so his Swiss mate says, what is it worth to live in a society where there is no homelessness, no hunger, and where every child, regardless of the wealth of their parents, enjoys equal access to quality healthcare and education? I mean, I don't think any of these countries is so perfect as that. I don't think there's no homelessness and etc. But definitely, that more social-oriented society where those taxes go to taking care of the more vulnerable members of society. It's attractive.
Yeah, and I think and that's kind of I think part of the issue is it's very easy to kind of put in like and we've talked about this with Raina Wynn's books as well about the homelessness, how it's very easy to blame the person in that situation, and that's kind of what they do in the more individualistic societies like this sort of USA. They blame that person for being in that situation when it's not necessarily always the case, and in fact most of the time it's definitely not the case. So so I think Europe kind of recognizes that, so they're trying to at least cover healthcare, and I don't know what housing is like I mean it's expensive, but I don't know what the social housing is like in these countries, but I assume it's there. And we know, and education seems to be mostly free, certainly up to end of high school.
And often university. I know in Denmark it's free.
Universities,
free university, and they get a quite high allowance to go. So
and it's one of those things that's like you kind of pay your taxes and everything, but you're not going to be, if you break a bone or something like that, if you're going to get it looked after. So you don't have to, this whole race to make the individualistic idea of, hey, we've all got to make lots and lots of money because we've got to cover ourselves because, if we have a incident, no one's going to look out for us. And it's kind of, I I mean, I understand the thinking behind that, because in a lot of ways, I still think people do need to be individually, responsible for their individual actions and things like that to a certain level. But we're talking about the way the Europeans look at it. It's not necessarily their actions; it's the actions of others, and safeguarding against that. Like if you go swimming with sharks or walking in the woods with bears and you do all the wrong things, well, it's much harder to feel. But if you just happen to be, born in the wrong place at the wrong time, and your parents have money, and then that kind of,
you're born with a disability or whatever, or just some random health problem strikes you, and all of those sorts of issues.
And even I find even things like if you're a veteran, a war veteran, I think Europe looks after a hell of a lot better, in Australia as well. And then you think how revered war veterans are in America, but they just seem to be reliant on businesses giving a discount to veterans or things like that. Whereas there's no concerted effort to make sure they're looked after. It's just, don't insult them, because everyone will come to defend them. But no one kind of goes far enough into saying, maybe we need to check if that person's going all right at the moment.
And have like really good mental health care and stuff like that.
I think if you ask for the help, if you're in some of those situations, you'll get it. But I don't know. I just find it's an interesting, and he doesn't really touch it on that in the book too much. But
I mean, when I see some of my friends in America, or and Americans on Twitter describing their healthcare system, it is pretty scary, the kind of decisions people have to make to not access healthcare because they really can't afford it, that kind of thing. And that's hard to handle when you're in a society where the healthcare is more universal. It's not perfect, but it's better.
It reminds me of a couple I sat next to on a plane once, and they dropped one of their pills and it fell down between the seats, and
how annoying.
And their monthly supply of pills was like $400, but they were coming to visit their kids in Australia, or one of their children in Australia, and they just said it's just ridiculous that, because you can't come into Australia or Europe or any of those countries and buy all your pharmaceuticals to take back to them, because
that would be a booming industry then, wouldn't it?
It's not how it works. But they'll say, this is like, I can get they can get an emergency prescription in Australia for the drugs, and it would be like $30 or whatever like that. But when you're paying $400 for them, you don't want to lose one of those pills.
Then they're precious. They're precious.
So when you think about it, and you look at that and you go, it just it doesn't make sense to me. But I was raised in a different environment, same as a lot of Europeans and Canadians. So we're all raised slightly differently, and I think that's definitely where his book is looking at, target.
I think you're right.
Trying to get people to think that there are different ways of doing these things, and maybe, and like I said, I don't think either side has 100% got anything right in any of these things he discusses. Like, I don't think he ever tries. I don't think he ever tries to sort of say, "Oh, that side's got it right," or "that side's got it right." But he certainly picks out flaws on all sides of the coin here, especially when he's comparing America and Europe.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, it is, it is so important when you travel to sort of try and learn some of these things. I think, like, for example, you could go to Scandinavia and not really understand any of that if you don't talk to local people.
That's right.
You could just go on a tour and see all the sites and never actually really understand that. I mean, I know I've discussed it elsewhere on the podcast, but when I was there and I stayed with an Airbnb, and the owners upstairs were school teachers, and I was fascinated by the Danish education system because it seems to be better than ours, and so I was quizzing her, and it was so interesting to be able to know more about it. But there was one part of that chapter where there was a statistic. They'd surveyed Danes, and they said 7 out of 10, so 70%, would be willing to pay more taxes in order to keep the system functioning to protect the most vulnerable in their society. So they already pay these high taxes, but a clear majority would happily pay more, which I thought was interesting.
And I looked at that from an Australian point of view, because I don't think that would be the case in Australia. I think
No, I think you're right.
and
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways Australia kind of sits somewhere between America and and Europe, but even then we obviously still don't get things right either. So
Mm, hmm.
so because sometimes we take the wrong thing from the wrong side of the
Yes, yes, that's
so
right.
but you know
But I agree. I think we don't value what our taxes give us. I mean,
no
I don't know now, if you see it now when you get your tax return, you get a little graph
yeah
showing kind of
yeah
where your taxes went, which I think that's really good. But we don't really, it's not really discussed the way it would be in especially in Northern Europe that, we're proud that we pay these taxes and they do these good things. We
yeah
don't sort of we're paying somewhat less tax, and
well,
it does provide us good things, but there's not enough
yeah,
connection, I think, between, hey, we paid this and we got this great healthcare. So
I think that's where like infrastructure, for example, we very much more like the USA in that, whereas you can't build anything unless someone can see a profit in doing it. Whereas in Europe, they look at it and go, this is going to provide a lot of social benefit.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so people are going to be able to, like rather than telling people you got to give up the cars, they make a lot of reasons why people don't need a car. And so people just willingly don't get a car then because
Because it's easier.
it's
Yeah.
easy to not have a car. Whereas in Australia and say the USA, we make it very hard for people to not have a car. And
Yeah, absolutely.
and
Yeah.
so and
Yeah.
there's a lot of different reasons why, but
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, anyway, so I did enjoy that chapter. Now, the other section that we both thought was good value was the issue of drugs. So tell us some more.
Right. So and I look, I'll talk about this as someone who's not really ever done anything remotely drug-like,
Yes, I also speak from a very inexperienced viewpoint, I confess.
Other than sort of alcohol. Like I think I remember I don't even remember ever smoking a cigarette. I try to remember I had a Cuban cigar in Cuba and put that down to a tourist experience. And
okay, so we're basically the least qualified people ever to discuss this concept, but I liked how he learnt stuff and implemented it.
He also isn't someone who's ever delved into these drugs, but he's looked at what's happened overseas, and I guess perhaps from his church or something, he's seen how it devastates people, and it just kind of the whole war on drugs thing just compounds on it. It doesn't help them, and so people won't get help because they're worried about getting into trouble rather than getting help. So, and I think that's what that whole, because he goes in the book and he says like the war on drug, he said that America's had this war on drugs since the 70s. So we're talking like over 50 years, and
it hasn't worked, has it?
It hasn't worked, and Australia, we've been mostly the same sort of thing,
we're not much better,
not much better, and whereas lots of European countries have all kind of dabbled around the edges and started to do things, and I think like he starts with the Dutch and their marijuana, which is what everyone kind of knows, but their issue with marijuana was not the locals; it was just the tourists coming in to try it because. And I remember when I was there, and they made a big fuss about it, like saying, "Oh, it's not actually legal. It's just we can't be bothered chasing after the small stuff because it's not worth our time."
Yeah,
and I think he says something similar to that in the book, like the resources to go into it. I think was something along the lines of that, and so. The reason I've kind of taken an interest in that is because where I live, they've started doing a lot of this. We've started to do a lot of drug reforms, and so
so just for international listeners, Justin lives in the ACT, the Australian Capital Territory, which is a little bit special compared to many parts of Australia. So
and Canberra being the capital, which I'm sure all our thoughtful travellers know because
they would know that. Yes,
they would know that. Not think Sydney, but anyway,
true. Yes.
So and being like a self-governed sort of territory, so a bit like Washington DC in a lot of ways, but we also yeah, so it's a territory with a government that can be overruled by the federal government more so than the states, but they haven't really stepped in on any of this yet.
And on the whole, their population is probably more progressive leaning than,
yeah,
and it's a relatively small population. I
yeah,
guess.
about 500,000. So
Mhm.
and so we've started to do things like, so marijuana was, I think it was maybe in the late 90s, we did what was called decriminalization. So I think it was
Late 90s. Right.
yeah, so you just got fined if you had small amounts.
Okay.
And then just before COVID, they've gone, we're not even going to bother with that. I think they had less than 100 fines or something in the calendar year, and it was like, and
Why bother any? Yeah.
the police weren't going out of their way to find people with these drugs in their hands. And most of the time, if they found them, it was more because of other reasons, like a domestic dispute, or
So they just found them, came across it incidentally, and then it's
So they've gone from, they went decriminalization, and then they didn't legalize it as such. They've legalized possession of small amounts, I think is the word. I could be wrong on that, but I don't know, it's like a certain amount by weight, and I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I do know the 2 plant rule. So you can grow 2 plants in your backyard if you want to.
2 plants. Okay, right.
Yes. But
interesting.
You can't buy them, you can't sell it.
Okay. It's a bit like the Dutch situation.
Yeah, so it's very much like the Dutch situation. But before they did this, there was all this, everyone's just going to start smoking marijuana and we'll turn into the drug capital of the world, blah, blah, blah. But
no,
there hasn't been. No one, that by any measure, no one's like, there's not an uptake in drug driving, driving under the influence of drugs or anything like that. So they've not measured anything. They're not seeing more, arresting more drug sellers, because that's still illegal to sell marijuana. So, and from what I've heard, because I remember someone writing into the newspaper, they were saying, "Oh, it makes it, they might be doing this, but it makes it so hard," because they were a cannabis user for medicinal reasons. That's what they said in the newspaper. But they said, "Oh, it's so hard unless you know the right people, blah blah blah," and so they were arguing in favor of rolling those laws back. But then. And this goes on. So then you look at like the Swiss approach. The Swiss had a different thing altogether, and they were doing with needle, drugs that are injected via intravenously, and so they had like their safe injecting rooms. And I know, like we've got needle exchange programs. Even in the jail, there's a needle exchange,
right?
But I know they're looking at that, and they were looking at safe injecting rooms. They've been a bit more hard to sell to the public, because that means the drug users are going to a room or going to a building, and no one wants the building
near them. Yeah.
So it's been a bit hard to sell. But and then also Portugal as well was another one where they, I think they just decriminalized small amounts of drugs, and I believe that's coming into effect later this year sometime. And I don't know the limits on all the drugs, but they've basically done the same thing. It's like the police aren't going to waste their time looking after.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, the police resources are better off used in more important issues. So aren't they?
Yeah. So they've gone for this approach, and the people who support, the people who are proposing all these ideas are saying like, this way a medical professional will be able to talk to more drug users, because they're going to see more of them. Pill testing was another one that we've done, and we get the music festivals over summer, and every couple of weeks you hear some teenager or young person's died from. New Sydney had a couple of people die over summer, and we've just gone, well, we've got pill testing, and all our music festivals, no one's died since we've had it, because most people, having the pill testing there means people are unlikely to sell the stuff that's laced.
For a start, yeah, exactly.
Because they know, word will get out if they're selling bad drugs or whatever. And then the people who get tested, and they say you were probably going to die if you take that, and so they don't take it.
Yes.
And at the same time, the people, the medical professionals are getting into talking to these people and finding out why they do it, and
Yes, exactly. Because they're not. Yeah, people will talk when it's not a crime and when they're not going to be
yeah.
thrown in jail for it. So yeah,
So,
yeah. So I really did like that Rick Steves. So he took
yeah,
what he
he's
learned
very-
from this, and then he's actually been campaigning in
yeah,
the States to decriminalize marijuana, etc. Which,
yeah.
like, he seemed to, from what he said in the book, done a lot of work in this area, which is
Because
a really good use of what he learned from his travels and then making a difference. So
yeah, because the drugs do ruin these users' lives, but the crime side just makes it worse.
makes it work. Yes, exactly. That's not a
not-
solution that helps. Yeah.
No, and this is how I came at it when you talk to people in Canberra about this, and the people who say, "Oh, this is stupid," why are we, making drug users want to come live in Canberra, blah blah blah. But it's not really about that. It's kind of like, well, I basically said, well, anything that the solutions we've got now don't fix the problem.
Yeah. So let's try something
I would
else.
rather any government, and not just drugs, any problems. Like, too often the governments just won't try something because they don't want to get it wrong, because then they'll get voted out.
And but this cautious way is not always a good way, is it?
Yeah.
Sometimes we just need to shake things up. So yeah.
But anyway, it kind of, I know we definitely, when I read about it, they talk about Portugal, they talk about the experiences in Switzerland and a lot of the European countries, and they're saying, well, the facts of coming in from these countries that it's working, and so
that's good.
I couldn't see this an Australia-wide thing like what we're doing happening, because
not for a while.
not maybe in places, but the governments would.
They wouldn't take the risk.
No.
Yeah. Not unless there's a big shift in public opinion.
And I imagine that's common in most democracies around the world. There's a different level of risk and different.
Yeah. And okay. So the last thing I want to mention is just a couple of areas that we're not going to talk about because we feel they're a little bit controversial in the sense that we don't agree with lots of stuff in the book, perhaps. So the Palestinian Israel chapter, and then some of the Central American parts, and also the parts on Muslim. So just briefly, I just do want to say that there's like quite a few bits where I was like, oh, this is, a politically incorrect way to say it, or it's maybe just, in my opinion, quite wrong. So I don't know, if you read the book, just be prepared, I suppose. So one thing that, it's just a very small thing, but he was talking about maybe in the Turkey chapter, I think, but he talked about the call to prayer, and he said, while the call to prayer sounds spooky to many Americans, I was like, oh, that's a terrible word to use. And I guess you mean that it's unusual and it's not what you would hear in your suburban streets, but describe it differently, please, next time, Rick Steves. And then the other thing that really bothered me was when he was talking about Muslim girls wearing scarves, covering their hair and stuff. And he made a comment that they were doing it under duress, that like blanketly, he kind of insinuated that no woman would want to cover their head. And I thought that was a very naive comment to make, and that he needs to talk to way more Muslim women and read more about it so that he doesn't say things like this that are kind of insulting, really. So,
and it's a tough one as well, because there would be women who are forced to do something they don't want to do. And
absolutely, yes.
A lot of women who wear it because it does stop the attention of men. And
and they have, so many reasons. I read like a whole book of essays on exactly that topic last year or the one before, and there's so many reasons why they might choose to wear head coverings, etc. And like he just made this like blanket comment, and this sort of, like, I think, like we said at the very start, just to let's full circle it, all of these issues are so grey. There's no black and white, and he made a lot of quite black and white sweeping statements, and that is not what a thoughtful traveller should do.
I mean, I always have the issue when people comment about Islam, they ignore the fact that Christianity isn't a single religion, and so many people within Christianity do not agree with each other. And Catholics and Protestants fought each other in countries. So
yes, exactly.
So why would you then carry that over to think that all Muslims would somehow think alike when
Yeah.
I'm certainly no expert in this, but I mean, we know there's Shia and Sunni
Sunni.
Muslims, but I think there's like 70 something different types of Islam, and they'll all object to being the true version and whatever. And certainly Sunni is like accounts for the vast majority of Muslims, but
just layer in so many other things.
Yeah.
Layer in the country they've lived in, their family background. Like this, of course, everyone's going to have different versions and different opinions about, you know, some of these teachings and everything, and just like everything's so grey, and you know, it's like, I just didn't like his black and white thing.
Malaysia, for example, which we've both been to Malaysia, they're nothing like Muslims in the Middle East.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
It's the blanket statements just never really sit comfortable. And you know, we could sit here and make blanket statements about, say, Americans or Europeans or Australians as well, and they're just not true. Sometimes there's something in there that's like a little bit true, and it gets twisted around, but it's
exactly. So
it's not helpful to just assume that's what everyone is like. You know?
Exactly. So that's my caveat. There's lots of good stuff in this book, but there's quite a few chunks that feel like that, and I did a bit of eye rolling.
So even in the Central America stuff, I wasn't really sure what he was trying to say in those sections, because
I know what you mean.
It was, so it was it's a bit hard to understand what he was trying to say in those chapters. So anyway, people should read it. And
I mean, I actually really did enjoy reading it, I have to say. I didn't like the eye rolly bits, but there was some really good stuff. And the fact that there's kind of a handbook for thoughtful travelers aimed at people who are traveling but not yet very thoughtful about it, like that's actually fabulous, really. You know, and the final chapter is kind of this good summary, I thought, of what we can learn from travel, and also what we should do with this knowledge once we come home. Like I really liked how he had lots of ideas for you know, okay, learn stuff, and then what can you do about it? You know, do you tell people? Do you get involved? Or, you know, that was really nice. I really liked that. And he had a breakout box that said, for a high contrast, look at your own country, leave it. And I thought that was, you know, that's so true. You learn a lot about your own country by leaving it and seeing how other people live. And so that last kind of chapter, I really liked a lot of that.
Certainly. I would say that he's definitely he's doing things in mostly the right way, or trying.
The intentions are there.
And the intentions are there. And, you know, no one's going to be perfect on any of these things. And he's also, like I said, writing for an audience. So it's whether he thought about the way he wrote some of those things, or whether that's just his own, because, you know, that's where he comes from. That's how they write it. And he didn't think that it was necessarily that offensive to write that. So, or...
absolutely. It's hard to know. I feel like I really want to interview him now.
I just use an example, like Australians. I think we generally will probably swear a lot more than a lot of other people, and we get offended by that. And I'd even write it in a message, put a swear word in a message and things like that. And look, I'm sure I've even sent an email at work with maybe a swear word in it.
Totally, yes.
And it wouldn't, but someone outside Australia reads that, they would potentially be offended by that. So
absolutely true. Good example.
Quite possibly similar style thing. What's kind of acceptable to the target audience of the book, he's also writing it to, and maybe there's a little bit of getting them on side and getting them to sort of go, I like this guy, he's really good, and then he puts them in and he starts hitting them with some of the harder, more thought-provoking material as well. So
that's so true. It might be partly strategic. You're quite right. So
you're right. You'd have to interview him and find out. And I'm
gonna ask.
I know very little about him. I think he had guidebooks as well.
He's tons and tons of guidebooks, and runs lots of. He's super prominent in American travel. So and I'd always assumed he was a bit more a bit less thoughtful. I just knew him as the author of tons of guidebooks. And that he's had a company that ran tours, and I just never actually realized until I heard about this book a couple of years ago that he also has this thoughtful bent. So.
I don't think I've ever seen one of his guidebooks, so but
No, I don't think you can probably
think
buy
they're
them here,
available
but
in Australia, but
yeah,
I'm sure you would see them in,
they're
especially Europe.
everywhere in
I think he
America.
does a lot. Yeah, like people with them in Europe and stuff. Whereas
Oh yeah, and Americans, yeah, carrying them around. Yeah,
these guidebooks are out, aren't they? So
yeah,
okay.
yeah. Anyway, thanks, Justin. This was an interesting chat and an interesting book. I'm still glad I read it.
Definitely a very interesting book, very interesting chat. Yeah, I think people should read it. It's just, it's not light reading. It's not. I don't.
There's some his interesting personal stories and stuff as well.
If you want to learn about a whole lot of stuff, and maybe, I mean, I think most of what he's written is quite factual. So it's just the interpolation of some of the stuff, and
but yeah,
you know, you can certainly read it and then do your own research about any topics that you find interesting.
Exactly.
I certainly did. So I did do some research on El Salvador, for example, because I knew little about it, and I haven't. One of the Central American countries I didn't visit when I was there because I had a preconceived notion that it was pretty dangerous and unsafe. So whether that was truth or not, I don't know. At the time, I'd have to do more.
Same. I don't know enough about it. I had a few students from El Salvador once, and that's the extent of my knowledge, really. And but yes. Anyway, it was worth the read. We don't yet have next book sorted out, so that's our job this week, Justin. We have to figure out our next book so we can lock us in for our next book club.
Yes,
so we'll get to work, everyone. We promise.
Definitely something more
light,
adventurous. Not opposed to people going on long walks. We've done a few of those. So.
We've got another long walk coming up, probably 1 or 2 book clubs time when we read Rain or Wind's next book. So we better not do a long walk this time. We'll have to do something that's not a long walk. We do like long walks though. So
they seem to make the best books. So
they make great books, don't they? So yes, but we'll have to do something else. Anyway, we'll have a look at our collection and decide very soon. So thanks if you've been watching. Thanks for joining us.
If they can always tell us, send them in too.
Oh yes. Actually, yes, please. Any extra suggestions are definitely welcome. So tell us what we should read next. Otherwise, thanks heaps, Justin.
Thanks, Amanda.
It's been a pleasure. And see you next time. Indeed. All right. Thank you very much. Chat soon.